And just like that, for the second straight year, the Orioles leave the postseason without even one win to their name. Another close loss, another game where the offense doesn't show up, and the Orioles lose 2-1 to the Kansas City Royals, are swept out of the wild card round, and their 2024 season ends just like that. I'll break it all down. What went wrong for the Orioles? Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we put an end to the Orioles' 2024 season. They fall 2-1 to the Royals and are swept in the AL wildcard series, swept out of the postseason for the second straight year. I'll recap the game, get you the 5 things you need to know from this Orioles loss that ended their season. We'll talk about kind of how this happened. I mean, what happened in these two games where the Orioles scored just one combined run and certainly pitched well enough to win a postseason series and just could not get it done. And finally, just little thoughts from the head and the heart of an Orioles fan about watching this happen for the second straight year. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball, and get the Booking.com app today. So it is over. As sad as it is, as unfortunate, as frustrating as it is over. Final score in Game 2 of the AL Wildcard Series on Wednesday evening in Baltimore. The Kansas City Royals 2 and the Baltimore Orioles 1. And this season is done. The Orioles swept in the best-of-3 Wildcard Series, giving up only 3 runs in 2 games. You put that up there at the beginning of the series, you say, I will absolutely take that. You would think the O's probably swept. No, because they scored one single run, and their season is over. The Orioles, for the second straight year after being swept in 3 games in the ALDS last year, swept in the wild card round this year. And I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from this season-ending Orioles postseason loss. And the first thing you need to know is the Orioles offense did not show up today, and it's a quick postseason. It's 2 games, but did not show up in this postseason series. After being shut out in Game 1, they scratch across, well, really not scratch across. They hit a home run for 1 run in Game 2, and that was it. And as I started yesterday's episode saying, hey, if you don't score, you don't win. And that was the case when the Orioles lost 1-0 in Game 1. Now, technically, they did score on Wednesday, but it's also really, really difficult to win baseball games when you only score 1 run. And that is what happened on Wednesday night. They looked a little better. I mean, it's hard to look worse than they did offensively on Tuesday. I mean, Gunnar Henderson flew out on the first pitch, but knocked a ball 97 off the bat into left field. It was a hard hit ball. The Orioles had barely any of them on Wednesday. So that was nice. It was like, okay, you come out here, you're aggressive. You hit a ball hard in the outfield. You end up with 9 hard hit balls in this game, which is a little more of a winning formula in a 9-inning baseball game, but still just not enough. Seth Lugo, kitchen sink approach. He wasn't as good as Cole Reagans. I think the O's had a better plan against Lugo than they did against Reagans. I thought they looked more comfortable in the box against Lugo than they did against Reagans. When you score 1 run, you score 1 run. That's all there is to it. Lugo used all 9 of his pitches, and he just had the O's just off balance enough. And it's not like he pitched incredibly deep into this game. I mean, he was pulled when he got into trouble in the 5th inning. The Orioles did a much better job of getting the starter out of there. And even though the Royals bullpen had been good in September, generally it's been a weakness of this team in 2024. Their starting pitching has been a strength. You want to get to that bullpen, and the O's did a good job of doing that, rallying in that 5th inning. And then it just all went downhill. Cedric Mullins hits the homer that we're going to talk about to tie the game at 1 in the 5th. And then they get that rally that they were just looking for on Tuesday. Ramon Arias puts a ball in play, drops one in for a single. Gunnar Henderson draws another walk in this series. And then the O's got what I thought was going to be the break. Jordan Westburg hits that little tapper back to the mound. You're thinking, all right, worst case scenario, Lugo throws him out at first. You get second and third with one out. You get a good scoring chance. And Seth Lugo kind of lost it in that fifth inning after giving up the homer. He walks Henderson. He completely biffs that ground ball. And the Orioles have the bases loaded with nobody out in a 1-1 game in the bottom of the fifth. And you've got the middle of the order coming up. It's your Santander, Cowser, Rutschman pocket coming up. And this was the spot. This was the spot, a spot that even though they had chances on Tuesday, they did not have a spot like this. After hitting a homer, you load the bases, you rattle the pitcher. And I'm not really upset at Santander. If you're playing the blame game on the three hitters that got out, I'm probably least upset with Santander. He's a fly ball hitter. He was trying to hit a fly ball into the outfield, get that run home, at least give the Orioles the lead. He got a pitch at the top of the zone. He thought he could hit to the outfield. Unfortunately, he popped it up. He didn't strike out. He had a plan. He just missed it, and he didn't execute. And when Santander's your guy hitting 44 homers, he's a fly ball hitter. He was trying to do it. He just missed it. Now, what happened to Colton Cowser was tough to watch for two reasons. One, he struck out with the bases loaded and one out. There's a lot of ways for him to give the Orioles the lead, and he just didn't do it. But to strike out on a pitch that hits you in the hand and might have hit you in the chest or face had your hand not been there. Yeah, he's looking slider. That's why he swung. It's a pitch up and in. He's looking slider, and he commits to slider, and it ends up being a sinker running in on his hands. And it hits him literally running in on his hands. Now, just our luck. If Colton Cowser just stands there, the Orioles take a 2-1 lead in the fifth. Instead, he swings at a pitch that hits him in the hand, which is a strikeout with two strikes. And while he did stay in the game briefly, he eventually has to leave the game because of getting hit in the hand, and Heston Kjerstad replaces him out there in left field. Now, at this point, I don't even know what the diagnosis is there. Even if it's something tough, even if there was some sort of break in there, you have the whole offseason, so you would think unless something really dramatic happened, he'll be good to go by spring training of next year if there is a serious injury there. But, that truly added insult to injury, or really injury to insult on that play. And then, thanks Vivek with the update. It is a fractured hand. You would have to think there was a break in there if Colton was coming out of that game. And yeah, thanks. We've got a couple of updates here. Thanks for that. I was avoiding all Orioles news after that loss. But yeah, you'd have to think if he's coming out of a playoff game, something bad happened. And of course, he fractured the hand. Jordan Westburg gets hit in the hand in this game too after coming back from that injury. Just thing after thing after thing happening to this team. And then you get Adley Rutschman up there, and he gets ahead 2-0 against Angel Zerpa, who, credit to him, has been just dynamite down the stretch out of the Royals bullpen, hard-throwing left-hander. And he takes a fastball in 2-0 right down the middle for a called strike one. Now, you can argue that, hey, you're waiting for a strike. You got the bases loaded. Adley's got a good eye. He could walk in a run right here. But that was the pitch to go after, and he let it go by. He got a good pitch to hit on 2-2. Unfortunately, he hit a two-hopper to Bobby Witt, who threw him out to end the inning. And that was that. And that was their chance. That was the Orioles' chance. Yes, they got the run, but bases loaded and no outs. And that was their chance. All the momentum was right there, and it was sucked away. And the Orioles had a few more chances. Ramon Arias crushes that ball to left field, and MJ Melendez makes an insane running catch to take away extra bases. Second game in a row where an Oriole screeches the ball out to the wall in left field, and it ends up being a nice catch by Melendez out there. Michael Massey makes that great diving play when O'Hearn comes up. The O's rally a bit in the fourth. Santander and Rutschman single. There's 2 on with 1 out. O'Hearn hits a ball up the middle that looks like it's going to squeak through. Instead, Massey makes an incredible diving play to throw him out for the second out, and then Mountcastle can't get the big hit, and that fourth inning ends without scoring a run. Like, they did have other chances, but the Royals made the big defensive plays, and the O's just still could not get that big hit. Second thing you need to know from this one is that Cedric Mullins at least provided that Orioles one run, and you got to give credit where credit is due to Cedric Mullins. If one Oriole on the hitting side, I would say pretty much every Oriole on the pitching side certainly showed up and did their job in this series. But if one Oriole showed up on the hitting side, it was Cedric Mullins. A double and a single on his birthday in game 1, played a fantastic center field in both games, and then provided the offense in game 2. His solo home run to lead off the 5th off Seth Lugo tied the game at 1. And that was cool for Mullins because he's kind of been one of the main veteran leaders of this team. And he had a tough postseason. He was 0 for 12 in the ALDS last year. And Mullins, we know, had a really bad first half. He surged offensively in the second half, became one of the Orioles' best hitters down the stretch when the rest of the offense was struggling. And that kind of continued right into the postseason. The rest of the guys struggled, and Mullins really came through. He tried to do all he could in these two games. And I felt like him hitting that homer, he gets a 3-2 fastball, turns on it. I mean, that was just a classic Mullins swing to hit it into the right center field bleachers to tie that game. You have to think that was going to spark the offense. And it felt like it was going to. It was just like, just get one run across. Talked about this on yesterday's episode. Just get one run across and you can relax a little bit. You can say, okay, we can score in the playoffs. Let's go do it. And I felt like that homer was going to spark them. And it seemed like it would. The next three batters get on base. They load the bases with no outs. You're like, oh my gosh, the home run did spark them. One more key swing, and let's take this lead and let's exhale and then try to hold this thing. And they just couldn't get that next hit. All that momentum just went away. But you do have to shout out to Cedric Mullins. And the really big thing is, his future as an Oriole is certainly in question. He does have one more year left. He's a free agent after 2025. But, with his inconsistencies at the plate and with the Orioles bringing up some outfielders, there's questions about, is he back next year? I think what he showed the O's in the second half and what he can do, Cedric Mullins better be in orange and black in 2025. And he was kind of the one guy that really showed up and played his part in this quick 2-game series. Third thing you need to know from this Orioles season-ending loss is that I talked about it a little bit already, but the Royals just came up big when the Orioles did not. And the Royals also got a couple of big breaks in this game. Of course, the big defensive plays that I mentioned. I mean, this Royals team, they were a great defensive team all year. That was one of the big reasons why they even made it to the postseason. By outs above average via StatCast, they were the number one defensive infield in all of Major League Baseball. We certainly saw that this year and in this 2-game series. But they got some breaks as well. They score the one run in the first off Zach Eflin. Michael Massey hits the leadoff double down the right field line, goes to third on a grounder, comes home on the Pasquantino RBI single. The 2-2 curveball, or it might have been the 1-2 curveball to Massey, that was on the corner. That should have been called strike 3. It wasn't. He ends up doubling and coming home to score. That's a call that changes the game. And really the big one was what ended up being the game-winning run in the 6th. Cionel Perez throws a great sinker to Kyle Isbell. Isbell chops that ball so hard and so directly into the ground that StatCast could not, and TrackMan could not even register an exit velocity on that ball because he chopped it so directly into the ground. But because he did that, he got the true Baltimore chop, and that thing popped so high up in the air, and Isbell has really good speed, there was no chance for Arias to throw him out at first base. So you get that one-out single, then you get the second out, then you get the little loopy single from Michael Massey, little duck snort off the end of the bat that somehow falls in right center field. And it felt like the 2014 ALCS all over again, watching that 6th inning. And then finally, it was the big break. You have Bobby Witt Jr. versus Yennier Cano, first and third, 2 outs, 1-1 game in the 6th. There's probably less of an argument to walk Bobby Witt there, because then you're loading the bases for Pasquantino, for Cano, who struggles against lefties, and Cano, who has struggled with walks recently. And any walk or anything would put the Royals way ahead in that spot. So you're probably going after Bobby Witt Jr., and he hit the ball hard, but Cano gets the ground ball. Westburg makes an incredible diving stop up the middle, and he had a tough decision, right? There was a pretty good runner at first base going to second in Massey. There's an elite runner going down the first base line in Bobby Witt Jr. Westburg tries to throw to first. Witt beats it out. It's an RBI infield single and a 2-1 Royals. Now, I can't decide if Westburg would have gotten the out at second had he just flipped it to Henderson. It would have been really, really close at second base on that play. But you got to know who's running where. And you got to know that, okay, it's a risk to go to second, but you got to know when you make that diving play that you have zero chance of getting Witt at first. Your only chance at an out is from the ground, flipping to Henderson at second and hoping it gets there just in time. And that was just the wrong baseball play by Westburg in that spot. And it's kind of similar to Tuesday where it's like, yeah, you can be upset about not walking Witt in the situation where he gets the RBI single. But you look at the game and you go, that play shouldn't decide the game. The one run that scores or the second run that scores shouldn't be the difference. Your offense should be able to do more than that. Unfortunately, they didn't. And these just little tiny things that the Royals got some breaks on and the O's didn't execute as well change the outcome of these games because they just could not hit to save their lives. Now, the fourth thing you need to know from this loss is that Zach Eflin got the start, and he did keep the Orioles in this game. Now, probably didn't go as deep as he wanted, but 4 innings of 1-run ball for Eflin in his first Orioles playoff start. He allowed 4 hits, 3 Ks, 1 walk, 75 pitches, just 4 hard hit balls against the righty in those 4 innings. Brandon Hyde said before the game, look, we are going to manage this a little differently and manage it like our playoff lives were on the line, which he did. And that was why he pulled Eflin. He let him go exactly 2 times through the order. The 3rd time through the order penalty is serious. Hyde had a very well-rested bullpen, and he went to that pen in the 5th to play the matchups. But I thought Eflin, he didn't have his best stuff. He was laboring a little bit, but he pitched well enough to keep the O's in this game. And that's really all you can ask for from a playoff starter. And listen, in my opinion, Zach Eflin was the best starting pitching acquisition made by any team at the trade deadline. He might have been the best acquisition, period, made by any team at the trade deadline, the way he pitched down the stretch. And it's even better. Remember, Eflin is under contract for next year. He is back in an Orioles uniform for at least 1 more season. That was absolutely, really a huge move. And definitely, I mean, without a doubt, the best in-season move that the Orioles made was getting Zach Eflin, and you cannot argue that at all. And so it was very, very cool to see him pitch well, even though he didn't go deep into the game, pitch well in a postseason game for the O's. And you know, it's funny how it worked out. The whole thing in 2023 was the Orioles just didn't have the starting pitching to get to it through a postseason. And maybe they didn't this year. It was a lot of question marks behind Burnes and Eflin. But the 2 starts we saw, Burnes and Eflin were fantastic. They were certainly not the problem. So at the very least, kudos to Mike Elias for going out to getting those 2 guys and addressing that problem. And at least in the 2 playoff games we saw, they had the starting pitching to win. They just didn't have the bats. And the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 2-1 loss to the Royals in Game 2 of the Wild Card Series that eliminated the O's and ended their season is that the bullpen and Hyde with his matchups, they did really all they could to keep this game close. Like, they give up that run in the 6th inning. Cionel Perez charged with the run. He takes the loss, but basically 3 fluke hits in that inning led to that run. Brandon Hyde I said it yesterday. I said he is going to mix and match all the way through the 9th inning to get through this game, and he did that pretty much to perfection. I mean, you do the combination of Danny Coulombe, 2 outs, Jacob Webb, 2 outs, Cionel Perez, 1 out, but pitched better and should have gotten more than that. Yennier Cano, 4 outs. Gregory Soto, 2 outs. Seranthony Dominguez, 4 outs. You get 5 innings of 1-run ball and just bad luck on the 1 run that scored from that bullpen. Hyde did a great job deploying that pen. All of those relievers, which again, were not good in September. Now, some of these guys were great, like Gregory Soto, but some of these guys really struggled in September. All of them stepped up, and you even have to add in Keegan Aiken and Dominguez in Game 1 Tuesday, putting up the 0 in the 9th inning. He made the right calls. The bullpen made the right pitches. And again, just like the starters with Burnes and Eflin, all of these arms, you got to give credit to these Orioles arms. They did everything they could to get a chance to win this series. And when you get 1 run in 2 games, there's really not much you can do as a pitching staff to win a wild card series. And that's what happened here. The Orioles lost. They're knocked out. They're swept. And the season is over. I'll try to make a little more sense of what the heck just happened for the 2nd straight year coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Now, I know a lot of Baltimore sports fans officially turning their attention now to the Ravens. Well, the Ravens got a struggling Bengals team this weekend. Joe Burrow, not really looking like the old Joe Burrow. Maybe you take the Ravens on the money line there this weekend. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And that's at FanDuel.com. And this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by PrizePicks. Now, what is PrizePicks? It's really the best place to get real money sports action. It's got over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. How do you play it? Well, you just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run games all season long with PrizePicks, and it's super easy. The app, you go on, you make your picks. It takes like 60 seconds to get your picks in, and then you sit back and hope you can win the cash. It is the best way to get action in over 30 states at PrizePicks. And also, they invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You don't have to get it perfect every single night. PrizePicks will still help you out. And if you sign up today, $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup at PrizePicks. Again, download the PrizePicks app today, use code LOCKEDONMLB, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's at PrizePicks. Run your game. So as sad as it is, this Orioles season is over. It ends for the second straight year with a whimper. Royals 2, Orioles 1, and the O's are swept out in 2 games in the wild card series, scoring just 1 combined run. And it is really hard to put together what the heck happened. Besides, of course, the obvious reason of the Orioles did not score enough runs. That was fairly obvious. But it's 2 years in a row being swept out of the playoffs. Last year, we talked about how the Orioles just didn't have the starting pitching, right? Kyle Bradish was okay in that game 1, but Grayson Rodriguez gets rocked in game 2. Dean Kramer gets rocked in game 3 against the Rangers. They just didn't look ready. That wasn't the issue this year. Burns was awesome. Eflin was good. They kept them in that game and gave them every chance to win. Last year, we said it was also just the Orioles' inexperience. They were such a young team. Not many of those guys had played in the postseason. They just weren't ready for it. And there was still some of that on this year's team. There was still a young ball club out there. But I mean, they've been to the postseason more recently than the Royals. And yeah, the Royals had some veterans, and Salvador Perez has won a World Series, and guys like Hunter Renfroe and Adam Frazier have been around the playoffs before. But that was still a young Royals team who came in here and won some games. And let's be perfectly honest, the Royals offense was almost as bad as the Orioles were. They scored 3 runs in 2 games. Usually that is not going to do what you need to do out there. That was how thin the margin of error was. You look at how the Royals performed in this series, it wasn't that different from the O's. They got great pitching, good bullpen, incredible starters, didn't really come through in the big moments, barely scored. They just did like 1 or 2 more things, and that was the razor sharp edge here, and the Royals won this series. But you think about inexperience here, look at what happened in the other AL wildcard series. Not only did the Orioles get swept at home by the Royals, the Astros got swept at home by the Tigers. You want to talk about the most postseason experienced team in the field in all of Major League Baseball? That's this Houston Astros group with that offense, that pitching staff in that ballpark in front of that fan base. And they score 3 runs in 2 games and get sent home packing after 2. So it's not just the experience that helps you. And for the Orioles offense, they were better in the playoffs last year, still weren't amazing. They certainly didn't come through this year. I'm not sure there's a lot you change there. It's an offense that has been great at times. They still finished top 5 in runs scored. They were second in home runs. They did a whole lot well offensively. Their hitting development has been great throughout the years. They have a lot of great young talent in the lineup. Maybe you add another veteran or 2 to get another adult in that room. But you go through all of that and you just go like, what did this show us? Well, this showed us the Orioles need to get better in some places, certainly. I don't think anyone's arguing that when you go back-to-back years getting swept in the playoffs. But also, it shows you how incredibly random the postseason really is. Anything can happen in these short series. The Tigers can play the greatest baseball ever in basically September and a little bit of August, and they can go in and sweep the Astros, who shouldn't be feeling nervous at all in the postseason. They play more postseason games than anybody, and they can just beat them up in 2 games and go home. The New York Mets, after playing a doubleheader Monday, can put the Brewers on the brink of elimination after 2 games just from the vibes and being the Mets. Like anything, you can get cold for 2 days and your 162-game season is over. And that is what happened to the Orioles. The expanded playoffs, especially now with the 6 teams, with the wild card series, it's not a good way to determine the true best team in baseball. The Rangers beat the Diamondbacks in the World Series last year. No one would make the argument, I don't think, that either of those teams were 2 of the best teams in baseball last year. The best teams in baseball last year were the Orioles, the Dodgers, the Phillies, all teams that did not make it even to the World Series. But the way the postseason format is set up, it's really not set up for the best team to win the playoffs. Vivek has it in the comments right here. The postseason is unforgiving. It absolutely is. And if you go on one little cold stretch, it can be 1 or 2 days, it can completely topple a season that is a marathon, 162 games just to get into the playoffs. There's not even too big of an advantage for being better in the regular season. It's just be one of the top 12 teams and get in. And then a lot of it is a flip of the coin. And again, it is not a good way of determining the best team in baseball. If it was, the Dodgers would have way more championships than they do. Honestly, the Astros would have more championships than they do. The Braves would have more championships than they do. The Phillies would have won one by now. Even the Yankees probably would have won one again. But that's not what happens here. Is it good to determine the best team? No. Is it also really, really fun and an awesome way to enjoy baseball throughout October? Yeah, it's awesome. It sucks when your team's on this side of it, but as a neutral baseball fan, it's awesome. And that is where baseball's come to, and I don't hate it. It's for the fans, and I think it's awesome for the fans to see it like this. But that's part of the equation here. It's not all of it. You can still execute and get things done and move on in the postseason. The Orioles did not do that. But some of it's also just the reality of the postseason. Only one team can win it all, and it's usually not the best team. And we'll see if it is this year. We'll see if, a team like the Dodgers or a team like the Phillies, there wasn't even a 100-win team this year, so maybe someone closer to the best team will win it this year. But it's a good comment here from Ethan. The playoffs do kind of even the playing field. It just kind of stinks when you play 162. And again, it is so much fun. Once I get over this in a couple of days, I'm going to be locked into postseason baseball and all the drama, and it's going to be amazing. But it also stinks when you're on the wrong side of it. And that's what I want to get to finish off the pod coming up next. Just like I do a lot of analyzing of this team. It's my job 5 days a week throughout the season, but I want to give a little more of the fan side of this. Just like this stinks. And we'll kind of get to that to finish it off coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Explore the U.S. cities with Booking.com you always secretly wanted to learn more about. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. So maybe you did get a little early on it and buy some tickets to Yankee Stadium for this weekend for the ALDS. You know what? You can still go. You can still use Booking.com to get a hotel and get some experiences in New York. And you know what? I know we're upset with the Royals now, but go cheer on the Royals because the last thing we need after this is the Yankees to find a way to win the World Series. So still go up there and cheer on the Kansas City Royals to take out the Yankees. You can get all those accommodations through Booking.com. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, even if it's another team because yours is out, Booking.com can make you a fan of that U.S. city. The right stay, it can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. And you can get that right stay at Booking.com. Booking.yeah. So to finish things off here, I'm going to thank some people for an awesome season, but also just want to say that stunk. That sucks. The season ending like that, again, the expanded baseball playoffs, they are fun for a baseball fan, but they suck when you are out early. It stinks when the ball doesn't bounce your way. It stinks when you have 2 bad days and your season is over. And it stinks when your favorite team hasn't won a postseason game since 2014. I can distinctly remember that last postseason win, Buck Showalter walking the winning run to first base so Zach Britton could face Hernan Perez and get him to roll into a 5-4-3 double play to end Game 3 of the ALDS in Detroit, and the Orioles sweep the Tigers. That is the last Orioles postseason win. They've lost 10 playoff games in a row, and it's not fun. It is not fun at all. And this Orioles team, they are young, they are talented, they've got new ownership in David Rubenstein, who certainly could make a big difference this offseason because, yeah, he's been owner since opening day, but he really hasn't had a chance to truly open the checkbook. Now is his time. He's already hinted at it in some of his public appearances lately that he's going to have to spend some money on this team. Those are all exciting things, and there's still so much promise with this team. There's things to be excited about. And that's awesome. Like you would think, going to be back in a similar spot, being a postseason contender to try and win it all in 2025. But that also makes it even harder to figure out what the heck has to change for the Orioles to win some postseason games and make a run when it really does count the most in October. Now, spending some money is going to be important. Trying to bring back Corbin Burns, if you can't, going after guys like Max Fried or others in free agency is going to be important. Maybe adding a more veteran middle of the order bat to this lineup just to provide a little more consistency and someone who's not going to get tight when the moment gets big. That could certainly help. And you look at the postseason, yeah, it hasn't gone well either the last 2 years. And you look at the guys who have performed. Now, last year, Gunnar played well, which was really cool to see. I know he didn't have a great 2 games here, but again, it's 2 games. The Orioles, Gunnar was good in his first postseason last year. That's always a good sign. But you look at the guys who really lit it up for the O's in the playoffs last year. It was Gunnar. It was Aaron Hicks, who was a nice veteran who had been there a lot, who got some big hits in that ALDS. And it was Jorge Mateo. He had that 4-hit game in game 2. Jorge Mateo was doing his absolute best. And it was unfortunate to have Mateo out down the stretch. Honestly, with the O's offense struggling that much, maybe they could have used Mateo a little bit in the final months. And then you look to this year, and I would say the best 2 hitters were Cedric Mullins, definitely, and then maybe Ramon Arias. I mean, when you're talking about Hicks and Mateo and Arias and Mullins, that's awesome. To go on a playoff run, you need those guys, those more role players at the bottom of your lineup to come through. And that's what the Orioles have gotten. However, you can't have your 8 and 9 hitters being your best performers in the playoffs. You need them to supplement what your stars are giving you. And the O's just haven't gotten it from the stars offensively. And they had a lot of problems in the DS last year. It wasn't just the offense, but this year, it's 2 games. You don't hit, you go home. And that's what happened to the O's. And so this is, again, some of the most just pure Orioles fandom coming out of me about what needs to happen. They've got the guys and they've got the talent. They should continue to improve and spend some money and lock up some of these guys. That certainly needs to happen. But they've got the core here that has already won a lot of baseball games the last 2 years in the regular season. They won 101 and 91 games. That is really hard to do. The Orioles haven't won 90 games in back-to-back seasons since the 1980s. It is hard to do that. But there's just something not there. And it's really hard to pinpoint what it is. You might have to be in that room to know exactly what it is. But to me, and again, this is going to be the least data-driven, the most just fan-sided part of me right here. And I talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago when I broke down all the Orioles' struggles hitting with runners in scoring position when it got to a really, really bad point in September. It's just the O's don't seem to have enough guys who in those big moments can just shut everything down around them, have that dog in them, and make that big swing. And it's been bad in the postseason. Still a very small sample size. It's 5 playoff games to completely judge these guys in the playoffs. And they've got guys that bring the energy. Anthony Santander brings the juice. Gunnar Henderson can bring the juice for this team. But the energy that they have around them, I think, is good. I think they have a great clubhouse. They have a great manager who pulls them all together. I think all of those things are true. But they just need another difference maker. And I don't want to sign Rougned Odor again. He's not very good at baseball at this point in his career. But that guy had an edge to him that maybe the Orioles clubhouse needs a little bit of. And again, this is straying about as far away as I'm going to go from any kind of data and statistics and analytics that I usually talk about on this podcast. And this is pretty narrative driven. And I try to stay away from that a lot of the time. But they need somebody with a little bit of edge in that room. And I think they had it when they had Rougned Odor in there. And I'm not sure they had it last year. But guys like Adam Frazier and Aaron Hicks were at least veterans who had been around the block. And a guy like James McCann, I mean, you want to talk about toughness. That dude takes a fastball to the nose and then catches 9 innings. That's an edge. I'm not saying there's nobody in this clubhouse that has that edge. And they've got leaders in there too, certainly. But, there's a lot of differing opinions on a guy like Tommy Pham, who joined this Royals team and is now on to the ALDS. He was on that Diamondbacks team that went to the World Series last year. He's played in a lot of postseason games. He's got a little bit of an edge to him. And I'm not saying you got to go get Tommy Pham, but I think the Orioles will be going after a right-handed hitting veteran outfielder this offseason. Maybe that's someone who fits in this clubhouse. And I don't even know if that's the fix because, again, they've won a lot of baseball games and just lost 5 of them when it really counted in a small sample size. But it feels like a guy who brings that energy, brings that edge. You look at that Braves-Padres game in game 1. Of course, the Braves were starting A.J. Smith-Sauver. They had to call him up from AAA because they ran out of so much pitching in that doubleheader, and Chris Sale got scratched. But second batter of the game, Fernando Tatis Jr., boom, home run to the upper deck in left field, 2-0 Padres. And you're not just going to go out and find a Fernando Tatis Jr. in free agency. That's not going to happen. However, the energy and emotion and edge and swag that he showed immediately after that swing, I just feel like the Orioles have the talent to match that. They maybe just don't have, it feels like at times, that swagger to match that. And again, this is such a narrative-based argument right now. And the biggest one you're going to see from me. But there's a couple more guys that I think this clubhouse might need to just take them to that next level to be, and also not just the edge to say, hey, we've been here. We're struggling a bit. It's okay. It's going to be okay. We're struggling a bit in the postseason. It's going to be okay. Other than that, it's going to take a lot of this offseason to figure it out, but they're going to stay a lot of the course because this is a very talented baseball team that won a lot of games, just lost 2 when it mattered, went cold, and the season is over. And that is it for the 2024 Orioles. 91-71 in the regular season, dealt with a whole bunch of injuries, and unfortunately, they flame out in the postseason, swept by the Royals in the AL wildcard series. I do want to thank some people for just this at least playing season of Locked On Orioles. I mean, I'm not done with 2024 episodes. I'm going to take Thursday off, but we'll be back Friday to kind of do the first dive into, okay, what needs to happen this Orioles offseason. But I want to thank you all, the listeners and the viewers, first of all. I know all of you don't agree with me all the time, and I know there's a lot of negative comments that come into this comment section. Some informed, some not so much, but that's okay. I appreciate the feedback on all sides. Probably appreciate the positive feedback a little bit more, but I appreciate anyone who listens to the podcast, who watches the podcast here on YouTube. Thank you all to the subscribers on both places. If you could leave a comment, if you could like, if you could subscribe to the pod, that'd be great. Leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen. That would be amazing. Thank you all for tuning in all year long. It's been another amazing year of growth here at Locked On Orioles. I have had just a heck of a time hosting this podcast, covering this team. It's been amazing, and you all make it worth it. I've mentioned many times before, I work a separate full-time 9-to-5 job outside of doing this podcast, and sometimes the Orioles play late. There's a disgusting postseason loss, all this good stuff. I'm losing a little sleep. I'm running out of time in the rest of my life, but I do this show because it fulfills me in some way. And I got to tell you, when this team's frustrating me, it is amazing to have a 30-minute outlet like this 5 days a week to get it all off my chest, break down the game, and then just kind of move on. That's honestly been really therapeutic for me as I've just covered this team every single day, day in and day out. But it's also due to you all who support the podcast, help it continue to grow. It has been awesome to see it continue to grow. And that is thanks to all of you, everyone sending out the kind messages. Thank you so much. Everyone I've met at the ballpark this season has been awesome to meet you. I'm so happy that you enjoy the podcast. So if I can meet some more listeners and viewers in the future, but it's kind of similar to 2023, despite the terrible ending, it was a really, really fun season of Orioles baseball with a lot of memorable moments that I think eventually we'll look back to fondly, but I know it hurts. It hurts right now. Also want to thank some others throughout the season, people who have come on the podcast, some of the friends of the show who have joined us, some of the Orioles players that we had on this year, which was pretty cool. Had Brandon Young on a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully he makes his debut next year. For the guys at Orioles on the Verge who have me on their show a lot. They're big supporters of this show as well. I want to shout out a lot of the writers who cover the team, but especially the team at the Baltimore Banner this year, which just did fantastic in their Orioles coverage. Got to shout out Daniel Allentuck and Andy Koska, who did an amazing job covering the beat. John Mioli, who's one of the best columnists you're going to see, did a fantastic job, as he always does, covering this team. Paul Mancano kind of covers in a different way with all of his digital work that he does for the O's, but he does an amazing job over there at the Banner with the rest of their team as well that covers the O's and the fellow Orioles podcasters out there. it's a tough season. Great job this year. Thank you to my wife, Hannah. Thank you to my dog, Ruby, for putting up with me for doing this podcast 5 days a week, every single night. 5 days a week will continue at least through October. Then we'll cut it down a bit to 3 days a week in the off season. Just want to shout out to Brendan Mortensen because that guy's awesome and he did an amazing job at Masson this year covering the team. The whole broadcast team was amazing. Kevin Brown, Ben McDonald, Jim Palmer, the rest of the crew, they just make it so fun to take in Orioles baseball every single night. The worst part of losing and having the season end, probably worse than just being able to cheer on this team, is not having your favorite baseball team on every single day. You know it's there. Almost every single day you can go to the Orioles, and that's the worst part of the offseason. They're just not there every single day, and you got to wait till, next March to get that Orioles baseball back. But even with that being the case, the podcast does not go away. Now, we go away tomorrow, come back Friday, and we stay 5 days a week for the rest of the MLB postseason. Then we go to 3 days a week for a while in the offseason. We are still here with you. This is going to be a huge offseason for the Orioles. David Rubenstein finally in control. Corbin Burns, Anthony Santander becoming free agents. What do the Orioles do to upgrade this team with some money to spend now? John Angelo's out of the picture in an offseason for the first time in a long time. And we will cover it all here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. So I know the baseball playing for the O's is over, but the podcast is not over. Do not go anywhere. I will take Thursday off to regroup, bring my thoughts back together, and then Friday we will be back on the pod. Basically, it's going to be 3 biggest questions the Orioles need to answer this offseason. That is coming up on Friday's episode. But until then, for the final time, at least in the 2024 season, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.